Hello and welcome back to the Electronic Intifada's live stream for Thursday, December 4th. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleagues Abunimah, Jon Elmer, Asa Winstanley, and Tamara Nassar. It's day 790 of Israel's genocide in Gaza. Coming up, the Trump administration's plan, blessed by the UN Security Council to occupy Gaza with a foreign force working on behalf of Israel, appears to be falling apart before it even gets off the ground. Ali will take a look at the latest developments. Later on in the program, Jon will report on the situation of the Palestinian fighters who remain on the eastern side of the so-called Yellow Line. And Asa will report on some important recent legal victories for Palestine in the UK, while highlighting one judge's disturbing conflict of interest and links to an Israeli spy. But first, let's take a look at the news. Here's a brief summary of some of the latest developments this week in Palestine. The Israeli army continues to kill and injure Palestinians across the Gaza Strip, in spite of the October 10th so-called ceasefire. Sniper fire, tank shelling, drone strikes, and aerial attacks are routine and incessant, especially in areas east of the vague and invisible Yellow Line demarcated by Israel. The United Nations Humanitarian Office stated on November 27th that in the areas beyond the so-called Yellow Line, which comprises more than 50% of the Gaza Strip, quote, daily detonations of residential buildings continue to be reported, and access to humanitarian assets, public infrastructure, and agricultural land remains restricted or altogether barred. Access to the sea remains prohibited, the UN added. That footage is from Gaza-based journalist Abd Sabah with Dropsite News, showing the Israeli army's yellow concrete blocks that it moved 300 meters westwards into the Gaza City neighborhoods of Al-Tufah and �𝐤𝐿 last month. The UN's Children's Fund, UNICEF, stated on November 21st that at least 67 children have been killed in Gaza since the ceasefire took effect, an average of nearly 2 children killed per day, and dozens more have been injured. On Wednesday, December 3rd, at least 5 Palestinians, including 2 children, were killed by an Israeli drone strike on tents housing displaced people in Al-Mawasi, west of Khan Yunis. This footage by Mahmoud Bassam shows tent shelters on fire as people rush to rescue those trapped in the flames. Also on Wednesday, the Wafa news agency reported that a Palestinian man was shot and killed by Israeli fire in the Zaytun neighborhood of Gaza City. Maha Husseini, journalist and researcher with Euromed Human Rights Monitor, stated on Wednesday that, quote, Israeli tanks have advanced into Gaza City, reaching the 𝐤𝐿 roundabout in the east, just a short distance from the city center. This is around 700 meters west of the actual Yellow Line that was agreed on. Israel's Yellow Line shifts daily, swallowing more of Gaza's land and quietly forcing hundreds of families from their homes. Israel is exploiting the decline in media coverage of its genocide in Gaza, she said. Israeli army vehicles were reported opening fire in the eastern part of the Burej refugee camp in central Gaza on Tuesday, killing at least 1 person. On November 29th, an Israeli quadcopter drone targeted and killed 2 young boys, 9-year-old Fadi Abu Asi and his 10-year-old brother Juma Abu Asi, in the Bani Suhaila neighborhood of Khan Yunis. The boys were reportedly gathering firewood to sell in order to buy food as well as medical supplies for their disabled father. In a video report by journalists Doa Mohammed and Samar al-Boji, The boy's father says they had eaten breakfast and gone into town to earn a few shekels before his checkup the next day when the drone targeted them. CNN said that he was, quote, waiting for them to return so he could set the table when nearby residents rushed to his shelter saying 2 kids had been targeted and killed by Israeli troops. Are they my children? He recalled asking. An agonizing wait ensued as he went to identify the bodies. I removed the shroud and hugged them. My little Juju's head was blown off. God rest his soul. His arms were severed and parts of his torso were gone, he said. Fadi's right hand and left leg were cut off, he added, according to CNN. The Israeli army admitted it had carried out the strike, calling the small children, quote, 2 suspects who crossed the yellow line, conducted suspicious activities on the ground, and approached IDF troops operating in the southern Gaza Strip, posing an immediate threat to them. Following the identification, the Israeli Air Force eliminated the suspects in order to remove the threat, the army said. In the week before, on November 22nd, Israel carried out a series of attacks across Gaza, killing more than 20 Palestinians. Footage from DropSite News' Abed Sabah shows the aftermath of an Israeli strike on a busy Gaza City intersection that killed 5 people. The Israeli army also attacked homes and shelters in Deir Balah and Nuseirat in central Gaza. Reporter Musab al-Sharif filmed this clip of a residential building on fire after an Israeli airstrike on the Nasser neighborhood of Gaza City, which killed at least 4 Palestinians. On November 30th, the Gaza government media office stated that over the 50 days since the ceasefire came into effect, Israel has committed more than 590 separate violations, killed more than 350 Palestinians, and injured at least 900. The media office stated that these violations include 164 direct shooting incidents targeting civilians, homes, residential neighborhoods, and displaced persons' tents, 25 incursions by occupation vehicles into residential and agricultural areas, crossing the temporary yellow line, 280 shelling and bombardment operations by land, air, and artillery, and 118 demolitions of homes and civilian infrastructure. Israel's blockade of essential humanitarian aid, food, fuel, medicine, medical supplies, and infrastructure and construction materials remains firmly in place as Palestinians struggle to get their basic needs met during the harsh winter months. The UN Agency for Palestine Refugees, UNRWA, stated this week that Israel is blocking around 6,000 trucks full of food and relief supplies, including shelter materials and blankets, enough to meet Gaza's needs for 3 full months. UNICEF stated this week that high levels of malnutrition continue to endanger the lives and well-being of children in the Gaza Strip, compounded by the onset of winter weather accelerating the spread of disease and increasing the risk of death among the most vulnerable children. The agency's director, Catherine Russell, said on November 28th that despite some progress, quote, thousands of children under the age of 5 remain acutely malnourished in Gaza, while many more lack proper shelter, sanitation, and protection against winter. More food supplies have entered Gaza in recent weeks, driving down market prices and improving families' access to food. However, many essential items, particularly animal source foods, remain unavailable or unaffordable for most, UNICEF added. Meanwhile, healthcare workers in Gaza are reporting that the ongoing shortages of medicine and medical equipment are entrenching the collapse of what's left of the healthcare system. Israel's restrictions on aid entry mean hospitals remain overstretched with critically injured and malnourished patients, and medical supplies have still not meaningfully increased since the start of the ceasefire agreement, stated the British charity Medical Aid for Palestinians, or MAP. Quote, less than 5% of the aid offloaded from trucks in Gaza has been medical supplies, despite the immense needs faced by hospitals following 2 years of Israel's genocide, the group stated on November 27th. Staff at 3 hospitals supported by MAP report facing severe shortages in essential drugs and supplies, including IV fluids, anesthesia medications, gauze, and vital drugs for chronic conditions. This includes fundamental items required to keep emergency and surgical services functioning. After more than 2 years of genocide and repeated deliberate attacks on every single medical facility, there are still no fully functioning hospitals in Gaza. And that footage is by Samer El-Bouji of a field clinic belonging to the Nasser Medical Complex in Khan Yunis this past week, following torrential rains and flooding. Ala Al-Sharafa, MAP's medical supervisor at Al-Shifa Hospital, Gaza's largest hospital, said, quote, "There has been no real increase in medical aid since the ceasefire, and the situation has not improved at all." Nasser Medical Complex, the backbone of the health system in southern Gaza, has 42 essential medical items at zero stock and 43 more nearly depleted, MAP warned. A damaged CT scanner has left Al-Shifa Hospital, quote, "unable to conduct essential imaging for trauma patients." During the Israeli military's invasion of Gaza City in September, a second CT scanner was damaged. There is now only one functioning CT machine in northern Gaza at Al-Ahli Hospital. This is placing massive pressure on a single facility and forcing clinicians to ration imaging to the most critical cases. Al-Shifa also remains the only facility in northern Gaza providing dialysis services, but is over its caseload, operating 32 machines for nearly 200 patients. Medical aid for Palestinians added. For pregnant and breastfeeding women and their babies, the health crisis remains critical. Writing for the Electronic Intifada, Farah Samar Zaina spoke to Dr. Sara Zain Aldain, an obstetrician gynecologist at Al-Sahaba Medical Complex in Gaza City, who described physical weakness and malnutrition in pregnant women. The following is from Farah's report. Israel's starvation policy during the 2-year genocide has severely affected pregnant women, of whom 55,000 remain suffering in the Gaza Strip, according to the United Nations. Quote, "Most mothers have severe physical weakness to the point that you can see their cheekbones protruding," Zain Eldin told the Electronic Intifada. If pregnant women want to make up for this lack of food by taking supplements, Al-Sahaba's complex's pharmacy has only a single type of multivitamin. Essential vitamins like vitamin C, D, iron, folic acid, omega-3, and magnesium did not enter northern Gaza for too long, midwife Siham Aldib said. Pregnant women are severely lacking them. The scarcity of food and lack of vitamins, Zain Eldin said, have weakened pregnant women's immune systems and led to malnutrition and anemia, with hemoglobin levels dropping. For more, read Pregnant Women in Gaza Face Catastrophic Scenarios by Farah Samar Zaina on electronicintifada.net. Dr. Ahmed Al-Farah, the head of pediatrics and maternity at Nasser Medical Complex, reported this week that more than 85% of essential medicines are gone. Baby formula is still very hard to obtain, leaving premature and newborn babies at critical risk. Reporters Abdallah Al-Attar and Samer Al-Bouji recorded Dr. Al-Farah last week.
I'm Dr. Ahmed Al-Farah, head of Pediatric and Maternity Department, Nasser Medical Complex. Today, we want to express about a lot of worry about the collapsing of the health system in Gaza. We are talking about collapsing after the ceasefire. Unfortunately, there is a lot of shortage of essential drugs. Nearly 85% of the essential list of drugs are lost in Gaza nowadays. The food is coming inside Gaza, but the medication, the medical supplies, the milk, the special formula of milk is nearly lost in Gaza. Now we are in the room of preparation of milk for the neonatal ICU in Nasser Medical Complex. As we can see, there is just 5 cans. This will be consumed within 2 days, and this is alarming about the situation in Nasser Medical Complex.
That was Dr. Ahmed Al-Farah at the Nasser Medical Complex. A journalist was killed in an Israeli drone strike on December 2nd. Videographer and drone cameraman Mahmoud Wadi was targeted by an Israeli quadcopter in central Khan Yunis while he was on assignment. Reporter Abdallah Al-Attar filmed Mahmoud Wadi's family and friends grieving over his body and talking about his dedication to journalism. Wafa news agency reported that Wadi's colleague, Mohammed Abdel Fattah al-Asli, was injured in the same attack. The Gaza government media office said on Tuesday that with Mahmoud Wadi's assassination, 257 journalists and media workers have been killed by Israel in Gaza since October 2023. On November 28th, the United Nations Committee Against Torture issued their periodic report, finding credible evidence that Israel is operating a de facto state policy of organized and widespread torture and ill treatment, and that such practices have gravely intensified since October 7th, 2023. The report detailed allegations of repeated severe beatings, dog attacks, electrocution, waterboarding, use of prolonged stress positions, sexual violence including rape, molestation, forced nudity and sexual threats, threats against detainees and their family members, insults to personal dignity and humiliation such as being made to act like animals or being urinated on, systematic denial of medical care, excessive use of restraints, the performance of surgeries without anesthesia, exposure to extreme cold or heat, including boiling water, denial of adequate nutrition and water, deprivation of clothing, sleep, and access to hygiene facilities and products, including feminine hygiene products, deprivation of light or darkness, use of loud music and noises, denial of the right to freely practice one's religion in a discriminatory manner against Palestinians and for purposes including the extraction of information or confessions and as a means of exacting punishment, including collective punishment. Adalah, the Legal Center for Arab Minority Rights in Israel, along with other human rights organizations, stated that, quote, the committee's findings reaffirm what we and many others have documented throughout the past 2 years. Israel now operates a detention regime that systematically brutalizes Palestinians, strips them of basic legal protections, cuts them off from the outside world, and shields perpetrators from accountability. The committee's observation that Israel maintains a policy marked by organized and widespread torture, collective punishment, incommunicado detention, and enforced disappearance demands immediate international action. Another report this week from the United Nations Trade and Development Agency, UNCTAD, found that Israel's 26 months of genocide in Gaza and continual restrictions, quote, have driven the economy of the occupied Palestinian territory into its most severe contraction on record, wiping out decades of development gains and deepening fiscal and social fragility. The unprecedented collapse, the report states, has, quote, unfolded against a backdrop of long-standing economic and institutional fragility with severe social and environmental consequences. Extensive damage to infrastructure, productive assets, and public services has reversed decades of socioeconomic progress in the occupied Palestinian territory. The resulting economic crisis is among the 10 worst globally since 1960, while the situation in Gaza stands apart, being the most severe economic crisis on record. Some of the statistics that UNCTAD released include a surge in inflation of 238% following restrictions on the entry of humanitarian and commercial goods in Gaza, unemployment at 80%, pushing the entire population of Gaza below the poverty line, and the loss of more than 69 years of human development. Turning to the occupied West Bank, Israeli soldiers killed at least 5 Palestinians during raids and invasions this week. Israeli forces shot and killed 2 Palestinian men on November 27th in the northern city of Jenin in executions that were captured on video. The footage showed Al-Muntasir Billah Mahmoud Qasim Abdullah and Yusuf Ali Yusuf Asasa emerging from a building with their arms raised and their shirts lifted, clearly indicating they were unarmed and posed no threat to soldiers, according to Middle East Eye. The soldiers then shot them at point-blank range. Israeli forces withheld their bodies after the killings, and Israel's National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir celebrated the executions on social media. Al Jazeera reported on Tuesday that Israeli soldiers killed a 17-year-old child, Tariq Mohammad al-𝐄𝐥𝐿, in the southern city of Al-Khalil, Hebron, after the army claimed he was responsible for a car ramming attack. An 18-year-old Palestinian, Raslan Asmar, was shot and killed near Safa, northwest of Ramallah, after the army alleged he had stabbed 2 Israeli soldiers. Israeli forces raided and vandalized the offices of the Union of Agricultural Work Committees in Ramallah and Al-Khalil, Hebron, on Monday, December 1st, amidst, quote, escalating Israeli targeting of Palestinian civil society and human rights defenders, most recently in the context of the olive harvest season, according to the United Nations High Commissioner of Human Rights' office. UAWC, quote, is one of 6 leading Palestinian civil society organizations designated as terrorist by Israeli authorities in 2021, based on an Israeli legislation that has vague and broad definitions of terrorism and terrorist organizations, which not only risks but has demonstrably led to unjustifiable restrictions on human rights, the UN added. To date, no evidence was provided to substantiate the accusations, the UN said. Licensed under Palestinian law, UAWC has long provided support to Palestinian rural communities and Palestinian farmers facing settler violence and the risk of forced displacement. The attack on the Union of Agricultural Work Committees followed weeks of harassment and public incitement by Israeli settlers and leaders of settler groups, particularly citing UAWC's work during the olive harvest season. This year's olive harvest season is the most violent on record, with 167 settler attacks affecting 87 Palestinian communities recorded as of mid-November. In occupied Jerusalem on November 23rd, Itamar Ben-Gvir apparently ordered Israeli police to raid and disrupt a children's performance at the Al-Hakawati Theater, claiming that it lacked a permit. The performance was entitled Dreams Under the Olive Tree. The Palestinian Culture Ministry said that, quote, this assault constitutes a blatant violation of all international laws and conventions that guarantee the protection of cultural institutions, including the UNESCO Convention for the Safeguarding of Cultural Heritage. Palestinian Culture Minister Imad Hamdan stated that Al-Hakawati Theater is a historic and national space embodying the collective memory of Jerusalem and reflecting the resilience of Palestinian artists in the face of Judaization attempts and land expropriation. He added that the raid was part of a systematic policy aimed at silencing the Palestinian narrative and erasing the city's Arab identity, the Tel Aviv newspaper Haaretz reported. We've published many features on the Electronic Intifada in the last week, including the one I highlighted earlier from Farah Samarzeina, but we wanted to bring you excerpts from a piece we didn't publish ourselves, but wanted very much to amplify, since it is authored by our longtime contributor, Yusuf El-Jamal, who is based in Turkey. In his new piece for Middle East Eye titled Overnight, an Israeli Strike Turned My Family's Home in Gaza into a Graveyard, Yusuf writes about waking up to the news that a missile hit his parents' house and killed 9 family members awaiting evacuation, as he says, leaving me with a guilt so deep it feels as if they survived and I did not. Yusuf writes, on September 27th, I woke up at 5:10 a.m. in my apartment in Turkey, feeling suffocated and thirsty. I was uneasy for no clear reason. I reached for my phone to read the latest updates from Gaza. I saw a message in my town's news sharing group in Gaza that an Israeli airstrike had targeted my family's home. I texted my brother Abud, but the message did not go through. Moments later, my mother, who now lives near me in Turkey, called. Her voice trembled with fear as she asked whether I had read the news. I walked straight out of my apartment and down the road to her house. My heart froze and my chest felt heavy. I refused to believe that my worst nightmare during the Gaza genocide had become real, but the feeling of suffocation would not go away. On the way, I called a friend in Gaza. Together, we managed to reach my sister Sarah. That small victory gave me hope that my family had survived. But soon after, Sarah told me that Aboud, his wife, also named Sarah, and their 2 daughters, Huda and Zainab, had been killed. The airstrike had also killed my sister Ghalia, her husband Yusuf, and their daughters, Mariam and Zainab, as well as my brother-in-law, Dr. Khalid. My sister Mariam and 2 of her 5 children were injured. Excuse me. I have experienced immense loss during the Gaza genocide, but it is different when an airstrike hits your own home. Something deeper is taken when the place that helped shape you is destroyed. The missile destroyed not only the walls, doors, and floors I grew up with. It felt as though it shattered the memories that lived inside them, too. Ones I shared with my beloved family members in that space. A wave of grief washed over me, leaving a hollow ache in my chest. I also felt helpless and guilty. The night before the airstrike in our home, my sister had sent me a list of 24 family members she hoped I could help evacuate. It included my surviving siblings, nephews, and nieces. They were excited at the idea of being saved from the genocide, of living without fear or destruction, of putting their children to sleep without wondering whether they would survive the night. All of that hope vanished in a single moment. Our lives changed forever. Our home was known for being full of siblings and grandchildren, not anymore. Since the attack, my surviving family members have been busy repairing whatever they can in our home so they are able to return. It's better than living in a tent, they say. But now they must live in a house that has become the graveyard of my siblings, their spouses, and their children. I do not even want to imagine what that means for them. In Gaza, people are constantly forced to choose between 2 bad options. Since the start of the genocide, I have lost 16 immediate family members. Most days, it feels as though those who were killed are the real survivors, while the rest of us who remain carry an unending, overwhelming pain. My guilt for not saving my loved ones increases by the day, and I tell myself that the Palestinians of Gaza, as a community, as so-called survivors, will never be the same. The tightness in my chest also grows with each passing day. The whole genocide feels unreal. To dull the pain and to try to escape from this reality, I imagine that I never lived in Gaza, and that the Gaza that formed me, the Gaza that is gone, never existed. In that world, I imagine my family living in a place where we celebrate their lives rather than their memories. In that world, my nephews would grow up in peace, and their heads and arms would not have to be collected from meters away. In that world, Dr. Khalid would have completed another master's degree in pediatrics. Aboud would have sung for our family and left Gaza, as he always wished. Huda and Zozo would have met my newborn. Mariam and Zainab would have tried on new clothes instead of being buried and burned in them. In that world, there is no genocide, and no political leader doubts Palestinians' right to life. Maybe someday we will build that world together. Those are excerpts from Overnight, an Israeli Strike Turned My Family's Home in Gaza into a Graveyard by Yusuf Al-Jamal, writing from Turkey on Middle East Eye. Yusuf is the Gaza coordinator at the Palestine Activism Program at the American Friends Service Committee. He holds a doctorate in Middle Eastern Studies. He's a Palestinian refugee from Gaza and a senior non-resident scholar at the Hashim Sani Center for Palestine Studies at the University of Malaya in Malaysia. He has contributed to a number of books on Palestine, including Gaza Writes Back and Light in Gaza, and is our dear contributor and longtime friend here at the Electronic Intifada. We mourn for and with Yusuf and his family. And now, as we always do, we wanted to highlight people expressing joy, determination, and resilience across Gaza and around the world. In Gaza, a small team of animators are working with displaced children to make art through stop-motion film as one way to process trauma and tell their own stories. Hanin Kuraz, Shuruk Darwish, and Noor Ajawad of the Animators Workshop Project say that animation here is not just a skill, it is a new language of self-expression, a free space for profound artistic exploration. This short film, called When She Left, Life Bloomed, Hanin says, tells the story of an elderly man and woman walking together along a quiet road filled with the warmth of memories. Suddenly, a violent explosion shakes the ground, wounding the old woman. She becomes transparent and gradually begins to fade away. From her disappearing body, red roses emerge and drift with the wind until they land and take root and bring color and fragrance back to the barren land once again. The old man remains alone, watching both the loss and the life born from the womb of grief. In his eyes rests a deep sorrow, yet he witnesses love continuing in another form, a rose that never dies. This film was made by children between 9 and 12 years old from Al-Nusrat camp and Deir Balah. That's a short film made by children 9 to 12 years old in central Gaza. And you can find out more about the Animation Workshop Project on Instagram at animator_Hanin, Hanen. We'll also have links on the written news post on electronicintifada.net. You're watching the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleague Ali Abunimah. Hi, Ali. Oh, you're muted, Ali.
Hi, Nora.
Hi.
It's good to see you. And there was so much news to catch up on since we didn't have a show last week. And
exactly.
Thank you for bringing it all together. And
my honor.
My heart breaks for Yusuf. And
I know.
It's hard enough to experience the kind of loss he and so many other people from Gaza have experienced, but to share it in that way, I think takes extra strength, and I'm so grateful to Yusuf for doing that.
Yeah, me too. And I think this is the first time that we have shared a story at that length that we haven't published ourselves, but we thought it was the right thing to do, and Yusuf's voice, and as you said, what he's gone through, just the unbearable horror, and being so far away.
And he's so dear to us, and we're heartbroken for him and his family, his mother, who's lost now so many of her children, like so many other mothers in Gaza. And of course, Yusuf lost his dear close friend, Dr. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿 almost 2 years ago to the day, coming up just in 2 days' time, December 6th. So I know that many of us are also thinking of Dr. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 at this time. Yeah,
we think of him all the time, of course. Well, we have a lot to get through today. Let's bring on Asa. He has a special segment that Asa, you've been tracking for a long time. It has to do with Palestine action, the involvement, of course, as always, of Israel in trying to suppress the rights of people to oppose a genocide. Asa, give us a sense of what you're going to be bringing us.
Yeah, thanks, Nora. Well, over in London on Tuesday, the High Court of England and Wales concluded a 3-day hearing to consider Palestinian activist Huda Amouri's legal effort to unban Palestine Action, the group that she co-founded in 2020. This past summer, of course, Palestine Action was banned by Britain's Labour government as a supposed terrorist organisation. Now, when the Labour government came to power last year, half of the cabinet had been funded by pro-Israel lobbyists, according to this report by Declassified UK. The latest news is that shortly before Amouri's application for a judicial review of the ban came before the High Court last week, the judge on the case, a respected expert on free speech law Martin Chamberlain, was abruptly removed from the case without any explanation. Campaigners alleged a stitch-up, and it's quite easy to see why. In this article, you can see on screen here that I wrote, Judge in Palestine Action case has ties to Israel lobby, that came out last week. I showed how Justice Victoria Sharp, the leading judge on the panel that replaced Chamberlain, has some quite deep historical and current ties to the pro-Israel lobby. First of all, her twin brother, Richard Sharp, the man in the middle of this photo, sits on the board of trustees of a charity alongside Trevor Chin, the man on the right of the photo. Trevor Chin is a leading pro-Israel lobbyist in the UK who has funded many MPs and ministers, including Prime Minister Keir Starmer himself, and who earlier this year was awarded the Medal of Honor by Israeli President Isaac Herzog himself for services to Israel. Chin is a retired auto industry tycoon who used his immense wealth to fund many Israel lobby groups over the years, including Labour Friends of Israel, which is a front group for the Israeli embassy. Here's Trevor Chin at a Labour Friends of Israel event in 2013.
Firms, I now work with CVC, the largest private equity firm in Europe. I spent my entire life working for Israel, for a better image for Israel, for success for Israel, and getting people like this involved with Israel. So the visit was a real eye-opener.
Thanks, Tamara. I spent my entire life working for Israel and for its image and its success, he said. Now, Richard Sharp, who is the chair of the board of that charity that Chin also sits on, is the former chairman of the BBC, and he also happens to be the twin brother of the leading judge on the Palestine Action unbanning case. Richard Sharp had to step down from his influential BBC position in 2023 after breaking the rules on public appointments by failing to declare his connection to a $1 million loan made to Boris Johnson, who was the Prime Minister of Britain at the time of Sharp's appointment. An investigation had found a, quote, potential perceived conflict of interest. His twin sister Victoria Sharp, who's judging this case, has made no such recusal from deciding on Palestine's action's challenge to the government ban. In any other circumstance aside from one related to Palestine, you can easily imagine that even the appearance of a conflict of interest should have been enough for Justice Sharp to step aside. But unfortunately for the Israelified British government and the increasing Israelified British judicial system, it seems that the actual goal was to create a direct conflict of interest in order to stitch up this case in favour of Israel. The State of Israel has been lobbying successive British governments for the last 5 years to ban Palestine Action. And this is for a good reason, because the group successfully used direct action to target the UK arms factories owned by 𝐓𝐡𝐞 Systems, Israel's most deadly drone manufacturer. It did this so successfully that no less than 4 𝐓𝐡𝐞 sites have been closed down as a result of Palestine Action's campaigns over the last 5 years. But a family linked to Trevor Chin is not Victoria Sharp's only connection to the Israel lobby. In the late 1980s, before she was a judge, she reportedly worked as one of 4 principal advisors to Rupert Murdoch, the media tycoon who later turned out to be an Israeli spy. This is him on screen here with his youngest daughter, Ghislaine Maxwell. As a barrister acting on instruction from the pro-Israel law firm Mishkon Dereya, Victoria Sharp represented Robert Maxwell in a series of lawsuits against the author and journalist Tom Bauer, who wrote a critical biography of Robert Maxwell. Maxwell even, according to Bauer, paid a private detective to spy on him. The author wrote in a later book that, quote, 4 lawyers were Maxwell's principal advisors. Lord Victor Mishkon and Anthony Julius were his solicitors, and Richard Rampton QC and Victoria Sharp were their barristers. During their frequent court appearances, they betrayed not a hint of doubt about their client's virtues. On the contrary, they pursued his mission with depressing vigour, commitment, and pitilessness. End of quote. Now, Mishkon Dereya later represented the Israeli embassy and Prime Minister Ariel Sharon in a case against the independent newspaper over this cartoon you can see on screen here, which satirised Ariel Sharon's deadly attack on Gaza City 3 days before the Israeli election in 2003, and how little times have changed. Anthony Julius, who is now the deputy chairman of the firm, claimed that this was an anti-Semitic blood libel. Britain's Press Complaints Commission cleared the cartoonist and the newspaper of anti-Semitism, noting that, quote, the cartoonist included the words "after Goya" at the bottom of the cartoon, a reference to Francisco Goya's painting Saturn devouring one of his children, to which the cartoon alluded. Julius and his firm have since pursued other cases against critics of Israel, including the 2013 tribunal against the University and College Union, which alleged the union was, quote, institutionally anti-Semitic, for merely debating the possibility of a boycott of Israeli academia. The case was ultimately thrown out on all grounds as an impermissible attempt to achieve a political end by litigious means, was how the judge put it. But a similar strategy of weaponizing anti-Semitism was deployed only a few years later against the Labour Party under its left-wing leader Jeremy Corbyn. Mishkon also acted during that campaign on behalf of Margaret Hodge, the pro-Israel lawmaker who was one of Corbyn's harshest critics within the Labour Party, who falsely accused him of being a effing anti-Semite and a racist. Speaking about the curious new choice of judge on the Palestine Action case, Tayyab Ali from the Bindman's law firm told The Guardian that a sudden and unexplained shift from the single judge who already had conduct of the Palestine Action case to an entirely new panel of 3 is deeply concerning, particularly without any stated justification. A spokesperson for activist group Defend Our Juries, which has been campaigning against the ban on Palestine Action, said in a statement that the replacement makes it hard not to draw the conclusion that this is a stitch-up. The judiciary is meant to be independent of political interference, yet with no transparency around this decision, public confidence is being seriously undermined. That 2 of the replacement judges have links which at least raise the appearance of a conflict of interest only deepens these concerns. Victoria Sharp's past work for Robert Maxwell is of concern for important historical reasons. Maxwell, who died in mysterious circumstances in 1991, was later reported to have been a spy for Israel. After he was found dead at sea, Maxwell was buried in Jerusalem at an extraordinary state funeral ordered by Prime Minister 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿, according to authors Gordon Thomas and Martin Dillon in their book The Assassination of Robert Maxwell, Israel Super Spy. He has done more for Israel than can be said here today, the opposition leader and previous Prime Minister Shimon Peres said at the funeral. Thomas, in his other book, Gideon's Spies, wrote that, quote, no fewer than 6 serving and former heads of the Israeli intelligence community attended the funeral. Thomas described Maxwell as Israel's super spy. In his eulogy, Chaim Herzog, then Israel's president, praised Maxwell's aid for the security of our country, was how he put it. Now, on Tuesday, the hearings in the High Court about the ban on Palestine Action concluded we're unlikely to hear a verdict before the new year. In a statement yesterday, 𝐓𝐻𝐿 𝐸𝐸 said, the government's presentations in court have made clear the ban rests solely on property damage, not violence, actions we took to prevent harm by disrupting the flow of arms being used to kill Palestinian people. The government offered no justification for refusing to consult those of us whose rights this ban strips away, while admitting they did consult the Israeli embassy, pro-Israel groups, and weapons manufacturers like Elbit, with Starmer even discussing the prescription with Donald Trump. My legal team presented an open and shut case that this prescription amounts to discrimination, and the government provided no answer to the prima facie evidence put before the court. This includes evidence that its own advisors warned at the time that prescribing Palestine action would raise serious questions about why it was not banning other direct action groups using similar tactics, such as Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion. Meanwhile, 6 political prisoners associated with Palestine action, charged over allegations relating to offences which took place before the ban, have been on hunger strike for about a month. Due to the bogus terror link, quote unquote, which they were smeared with even before the ban went into action, many of them have been held in remand awaiting trial for far longer than the maximum normally allowed period of 6 months on remand. They are on the protest calling for their release on bail and the end of what they say amounts to political persecution by the British government. And you can see on screen here this standalone podcast episode that we released yesterday. We interviewed the sister of one of the hunger strikers, Kamran Ahmed, alongside Francisca Nadine, a former Palestine Action political prisoner. So go and check that out on YouTube or on the front page of electronicintifada.net after the live stream to learn more about the hunger strikers. All of this comes in the context of new plans announced recently by the Labour government's Justice Minister, David Lammy, who is also in hoc to Israel lobbyists and has also been funded by Trevor Chin. Lammy details his plans of a so-called reform of the justice system, which critics say could be the beginning of the end to the ancient right of trial by jury in Britain. According to Sky News, under the most recent version of Lammy's plans, as many as 3/4 of trials that would have been decided by juries will now instead be transferred to judges or magistrates if the reform becomes law. Israelification of British institutions continues apace. Even part of the government's evidence against Palestine action this week was held in secret hearing. 𝐸𝐸 was not permitted to see the allegations presented in this secret hearing due to the so-called closed material procedure, something which sounds quite similar to the so-called secret evidence which is routinely used in Israel's kangaroo system of military courts, which is deployed against Palestinians and not against Jews, and has a conviction rate of some 99.7%. But it's not all bad news in the UK. There have been several important and hard-fought recent legal victories won by activists and campaigners. On Tuesday, the Jersey-based solidarity activist Natalie Strecker was cleared of terrorism charges in a case which local media followed on its front pages and reported as a landmark trial. Strecker has been involved with the solidarity movement for many years in Jersey, has visited the Gaza Strip twice. Jersey is the largest of the British-ruled Channel Islands, which are off the coast of northern France. She was charged with inviting support for a prescribed terrorist group after she posted on social media that Palestinians have the right to resistance under international law. The UK government reportedly trawled through some 50,000 of her posts and sent a prosecutor from the mainland to pursue Strecker, even though the island has its own legal system. The trial descended into farce at times. I talked to Strecker yesterday. She told me that 20 minutes of the prosecution's case in court was spent reading out the entirety of this 2021 article by the Electronic Intifada's own Ali Abunimah, titled "It's Time to Change Liberal Discourse About Hamas." Now, the disturbing part about this is that Strecker had shared it with just a few of her friends on a private group chat, and those messages had been extracted from her phone by police who trawled the messages and the fact that she shared this article. The case, as I said, Natalie was acquitted of, supporting terrorism. So it was an important victory in that sense, but it should never have been brought in the first place. And dangers remain that similar cases could again be brought to court by the British regime. In a second case, this one on the English mainland earlier this month, the journalist Greg Hadfield was cleared in a Brighton court of allegations of harassment and obscenity over reporting he did at the start of this year, exposing the activities of Ivor Kaplan, a former Labour government minister and a pro-Israel lobbyist. Now, Ivor Kaplan was arrested by police in January on suspicion of engaging in sexual communications with a child. The arrest was caught on camera after a sting operation launched by a volunteer group of paedophile hunters, one of whom had posed over the phone as a 15-year-old boy. Yet, Kaplan was released soon after and still seems not to have been charged with any crime. His bail has been repeatedly extended over the last year, most recently last month, and he was actually released under investigation rather than a new bail in this most recent release. In fact, the only person charged with anything connected to Kaplan's alleged wrongdoing was Hadfield, the very journalist who had sought to draw attention to it. Hadfield was pursued by prosecutors after he had attempted to draw attention to Kaplan's increasingly disturbing public activities, apparently on the instigation of local anti-Palestinian activist Fiona Sharp of the Israeli government-linked group Sussex Friends of Israel. In between promoting his mainstream media appearances and commenting on Labour Party politics, Kaplan openly and repeatedly posted graphic sexual material on his Twitter/X timeline over the course of some months. I used to follow him on X at the time, and it was so bad that initially I assumed that he had been hacked, but he hadn't. It was a screenshot of one of these posts that Hadfield had reposted to X at the same time as asking Fiona Sharp, one of Kaplan's pro-Israel associates in Brighton, why she hadn't said anything to stop Kaplan. And some very high-profile people, by the way, used to interact with Kaplan on Twitter quite regularly, including people now in the British government. At Brighton Magistrates Court last month, the judge ruled that Hadfield had been whistleblowing and frustrated by the inaction of other parties and bringing the information to a more public platform. So it's good that Greg was acquitted of the charges, but again, this is another prosecution that should never have been brought. Kaplan was formerly a leading official in both the Jewish Labour movement and in the Labour Friends of Israel. This photo is from a Labour Friends of Israel event at Labour Party conference a few years ago. And you can see him here with several leading lights of the pro-Israel lobby, including Wes Streeting, current government health minister. So an official in both Jewish Labour Movement and Labour Friends of Israel, which are two lobby groups within the ruling party of government that are both closely tied to the Israeli embassy in London. Now, for the final recent legal victory that I want to mention today, we're going to return to my homeland of Wales to congratulate Hibba Ahmed and Aisha Behit, who you can see on the screen here, whose conviction for harassment was overturned at Cardiff Magistrates Court 2 weeks ago. Ahmed and Behit were disgracefully pursued through the courts for 16 months by their local Labour lawmaker for Pontypridd, Alex Davies-Jones, who you're about to see in this exclusive video. She's now a minister at the Ministry of Justice, of all places. In this video, playing silently, it's an EI exclusive, it's never been shown in full before. It's the full interaction which proves the pair's innocence and appears to show that Alex Davies-Jones lied about being harassed. You can see from this video that her and her team approached the two activists, not the other way around. Davies-Jones, a parliamentary supporter of Labour Friends of Israel, had approached the pair during last year's general election while they were passing out a flyer in their local area, raising awareness of her complicity in the Gaza genocide. A clip of part of the interaction went viral online, But within 3 hours of posting the video, the pair were raided and arrested by South Wales police, and then it pursued through the courts over the course of nearly a year and a half. Now, I'm told that Davis Jones has family or associates in the police in South Wales, so whether or not that played a role in this effectively state harassment remains to be seen, but I think it's likely. In my view, the Labour MP claimed during the court case that her constituents holding her to account for her pro-genocide actions was scary and that they had harassed her. But she failed to mention the fact that it was her who had approached the pair in the first place. As you can see from the video, she doesn't look remotely scared. The court disagreed with the MP and the activist's convictions were overturned. Again, an important victory, but a case that should never have been brought in the first place. Are all these more recent victories hopeful signs for the Palestine action and banning? Or has the British political establishment and the Israel lobby already made the outcome of that case a foregone conclusion? Only time will tell. We'll be following developments closely, and you can read more about Victoria Sharp and Rob Maxwell in my piece currently on the front page of our site at electronicintifada.net, so go and check that out there.
Thank you so much, Asa, for that thorough breakdown.
Wow. I mean, of course, I've read your story about the replacement of the judge in the Palestine action hearing. And, it's so clear to me from having reported on and followed many cases in the United States that a judge with those kinds of connections to the issue or the matter that's before the court should recuse themselves to avoid even the appearance of a conflict of interest.
Yeah.
And as I understand it, there are similar conventions and rules in the UK, but what has happened here is the opposite. They took a judge who has no apparent conflict of interest, no connection to the case, who is a subject matter specialist, and replaced him with a judge that has very clear conflicts of interest. That seems extraordinary.
Yeah. It's crazy stuff. I mean, and I didn't even get into the other two judges, one of whom was on this 3-judge panel, one of whom was responsible for denying Julian Assange's appeal against extradition to the United States. So, this really does have the hallmarks of a kind of classic British establishment stitch-up. But nonetheless, we will wait and see what happens.
We will. Thanks. Yeah.
And just one other thing.
Yeah.
I mean, Asa, when you were preparing your report and you told me yesterday that you'd learned that my article from the Electronic Intifada was read out in court, that it was read out in court, and you said the prosecution read out my article. Tamara, can we get the article back up? It's the one. It's time to change liberal discourse on Hamas. I thought, no, Asa, did you make a mistake? Do you mean the defense read it out? And you said, no, it was the prosecution, because apparently, as I understand Natalie Strecker, and I'm very happy for her that she was acquitted. What an ordeal to have had to go through just for speaking your mind. That, as I understood, she just shared it in a discussion group to say something like, hey guys, this is an interesting article, have a read, as we all do all the time. And the prosecution read it in evidence. But that is just so funny to me, because the whole court would have had to listen to my article debunking so much of the
their entire argument.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, I don't know. That's just amazing to me. But then again, hey, just another sign of the impact of the Electronic Intifada's journalism. So very, very proud of that.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Asa. And yeah, I know you'll be continuing to track this
Great
story.
reporting, Asa. Very important reporting, I have to say, for people all over the world to hear about what's happening in the UK. We need people in the United States to hear about this, because, and all over the world, because often they think of the UK as this very sort of reasonable counterbalance to, Trump or whatever. And people need to understand that that's not quite the case.
This is the thing. I mean, this is why I started to use the word British regime, because things have gotten so bad here, especially over the last 2 years. And, we haven't really even had much of an opportunity to follow up on the degeneration of our own rights, specifically when it comes to Palestine in this country, because it's gotten so extreme. Like we're getting to a kind of German level of repression on the issue in Britain. It's becoming really grim. Like for example, this Welsh story that I mentioned, like I was aware of it at the time, but it wasn't until just recently, a couple of weeks ago, when these two young activists were acquitted. They have their conviction overturned on appeal, rightfully so. It wasn't until then, and the media reporting, that the mainstream media was almost sort of forced to report it a little bit more accurately because of the judge's ruling. Even I hadn't realised that they hadn't even approached this MP. Like this MP, of course, Alex Davies-Jones, she went to all the media and said, "Oh, these," and it was part of a kind of moral panic in the London media at the time. There was all this stuff about Peter actually Oborne, who we had on a few weeks ago in his book Complicit, talks about this in a really insightful way. There was this real moral panic about. And a lot of it was very Islamophobic as well, of these terrible Muslims are sort of attacking MPs and harassing MPs and all of this stuff, and it was completely bogus. It was almost completely bogus. Like there was many cases of purely legitimate campaigning, which you're supposed to do, right? Allegedly, and what is an alleged democracy like Britain is supposed to be. You're supposed to hold politicians accountable, and especially during a general election campaign, you're supposed to hold them to their word on what they say they're going to do. But she completely harassed these campaigners who were just trying to hold her to account for her lies. And it seems, from what I can see, that this MP may well have lied actually under oath. That's what it looks like to me. I'm going to be looking into it a bit more, I think.
Thank you. You have this uncanny ability to track the most heinous politicians on that island, and so thank you.
We're surrounded by them.
Yeah. Amazing. Thanks, Asa. Let's bring Jon on. Hey, Jon.
Hello.
So switching gears a little bit, you're going to be talking about the situation on the ground, going back to Gaza, especially all of the, like as I mentioned in my news report, the so-called yellow line keeps getting pushed farther and farther west by the Israeli military. And there has been in the last week these stories of the fighters, especially in southern Gaza, who are trapped in the so-called no-go zone. So give us a thumbnail sketch of what you're going to be talking about, and then take it away.
Yeah, I mean, Israel has the violating the ceasefire, as you report in the newscast every week. And these violations include the fact that there's a group of fighters that are on the eastern side of the yellow line that were, through the negotiations, supposed to be given safe passage back into the Gaza area of Gaza that is controlled by Palestinians, and Israel's not doing that, and they've just defied that for the past month, along with many other ceasefire violations. But this is the one that that falls into my wheelhouse.
All right, Ali, do you want to do the honors?
Yeah, take it away, John.
All right. You are watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada. I am Jon Elmer. This is the Resistance Report for day 790 of Israel's genocidal war in Gaza, and it is day 56 of the ceasefire, such as it is. I am reporting this on December 4th. We're now in the 3rd December of this war. I say as such with the ceasefire, of course, because if you all listen to Nora's report off the top, ceasefire is in name only. The IDF has been bragging about the number of airstrikes. The other day, they bragged about 250 airstrikes in less than 3 weeks in the Gaza Strip. And that is just in that period of time. So there's been hundreds more as well. The Gaza Media Office in the United Nations Relief Works Agency, UNRWA, their numbers for the ceasefire, which began October 11th, are 356 Palestinians killed, 909 wounded. That number goes up by the hour. In more than 600 military violations of the ceasefire that happen daily. These ceasefire violations that are counted do not include the failure to fulfill the humanitarian terms that were agreed upon, including key components of it, like fuel, which is in only a fraction of has gotten in. Fuel is, of course, the key to Palestinian sovereignty inside Gaza, to be able to do reconstruction on their own, to be able to fix their own society, and not wait for the US's Board of Peace or whatever to find people to participate in the rebuilding. The Palestinians will rebuild on their own, and that's why the fuel is being held back as part of Israel's genocidal campaign. Also, we know it's the winter. We see the footage coming out of Gaza of the rain, shelter units that were promised, that were agreed upon, have not been delivered, and all kinds of machinery. We know the heavy machinery to find people that are buried in the rubble. That there has been some of that machinery brought into Gaza, but it's been brought in to find Israelis, not Palestinians. And of course, spare parts. You'll hear constantly coming out of Gaza the shortage of spare parts that Israel has prevented from getting in. None of those last things that I've said count as ceasefire violations in the 600 tally that's being used. The 600 violations are military martial violations. And like I said, more than 350 killed and nearly 1,000 wounded. Let's take a look at the first map here, because I got a map, a fresh map here, and a different look at Gaza. This is Gaza as seen by the refugee camps. Gaza is 80% refugees, descendants from the Nakba in 1948 and the 3 years after, where Palestinians were warehoused and then ultimately put into the Gaza Strip, where the Gaza Strip became the warehouse. And they have originally the border of the settlements, or the border of the Gaza Strip, were the settlements, and that is the Gaza envelope. Israel used militarized civilian settlements as the border. After the first Intifada, the Israelis began to fence off Gaza in the border, the boundary. We'll call it the boundary because it's obviously not a border. Was fenced off beginning in the first Intifada in the late 1980s, and that culminates in the second Intifada. By the second Intifada, the wall around Gaza is concrete wall, high concrete walls, and then once the settlers were driven out of Gaza, along with the soldiers, Israel began to set about its high-tech iron wall that was so spectacularly breached and dismantled on October the 7th. It was a wall that was supposed to block underground tunnels. It was supposed to be the most high-tech border fence in the world, and the 𝐶assam brigades dismantled that in minutes. But I just wanted to give you a different look in the maps here. You can see in the north there, the Jabalia refugee camp, Al-Shati camp, the beach camp. And then in the center, you have the middle camps area. And in the south, Khan Yunis and Rafah are the camps. And Rafah is spread out. And Rafah is what we are going to focus on today. If we look at the next map, you can see these are these maps that came out. We know these maps have been crewed. I reported on these maps right away when Trump posted the map of where the line of Israeli control will be. And this is a map from Al Jazeera that is drawn based on Trump's map. And these are very simple maps. They're crude maps. And the key is that these lines match. They go through neighborhoods. They go through people's communities. They go through their homes. They're in the way of where they travel. And so to have such a vague map, I think really highlights, these maps are really a microcosm of the entire Trump plan, where vagueness is what characterizes the entire endeavor. And that is what we're going to focus on today, because I want to talk about the fighters that are trapped on the other side of that yellow line in southern Gaza. You can see in Rafah, it's a massive area in southern Gaza, in Khan Yunis and Rafah area, that is being that falls on the eastern side of the line, and the fighters have remained there. The original Trump administration plan granted amnesty to the 𝐶assam fighters, to all fighters who are on that side of the line, and that was part of the agreement that was negotiated and agreed upon by the resistance, the understanding that that would happen. In early November, Washington, at this point, Washington is vernacular to replace Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, who are basically in charge of this entire process themselves, and based it mostly, as they bragged about on a long 60 Minutes interview, that the entire ceasefire was essentially organized through cell phone calls to key leaders in the region that would back this plan. But the plan from early November from Washington was to find a quick solution to the standoff between the Hamas fighters on the eastern side of the line in Rafah. Kushner and Witkoff even made an express visit to Israel in November in order to tell Israel to allow the fighters to cross. We'll remember that gestures of good faith between Kushner, Witkoff, and the Palestinian resistance had been much. The resistance handed over for nothing one of the American Israeli soldiers that was held captive as a measure of good faith that was supposed to start the negotiations. So they're already, Kushner and Witkoff, in debt to the resistance. And so they actually flew over to Israel with the express purpose of meeting with Netanyahu to sort this situation out. Witkoff spoke in November at a business conference in Miami where he talked about 200 fighters trapped in Rafah, and he said that they're he started talking about surrender only in November, and that shows how little he understands about the conflict that he is the lead negotiator on. 𝐶assam was not going to surrender. They were negotiated for safe passage back to Palestinian-controlled area in the Gaza Strip. Hamas put out a statement to that saying, the brutal crime the occupation is committing by pursuing, killing, and arresting the fighters trapped in the tunnels of Rafah is a blatant violation of the ceasefire agreement and clear proof of the ongoing attempts to undermine and destroy this agreement. Hamas presented specific mechanisms to address the matter while maintaining full communication with the mediators and with the American administration as the key guarantor of the ceasefire. We hold the occupation fully responsible for the lives of our fighters, and we call on the mediators to intervene urgently and pressure the occupation to allow our men to return to their homes. They represent a unique example of sacrifice, heroism, and patience, and they are a symbol of the dignity and freedom of the Palestinian people. And we have seen recently, over the past month, the ICRC traveling on the eastern side of the Yellow Line with Qassam fighters in order to find Israeli captives. That same mechanism could be used to bring the fighters in Rafah back across the line. There was some talk that that would happen with the handover of Hadar Golden, who is a Israeli soldier who was captured in the 2014 war. The negotiations for that, again, Qassam fulfilled its end of the negotiations and handed over that soldier from 2014, and still no deal on the captives. But as this next map shows, there's much more precise maps to be found, although you're going to see in this report coming up that there's a number of maps that are being used by all parties in here that are all not the same maps. And this is the bottom of this map that you're looking at here. We're looking at a much more detailed map, one that's based on the actual area where the yellow blocks had been placed. And this is from Ben Zion Makalas. He is an IDF adjacent mapper and open source mapper. And there's currently right now 2 brigades, the Nahal Brigade and the Golani Brigade, that are in that area of Eastern Rafah looking for the fighters. And the IDF has said over the past 40 days, troops from the Nahal and Golani brigades, together with Yahalom Tunnel, the Yahalom are tunnel troops. The Yahalom troops under the command of the Gaza division have been operating in a concentrated effort in Eastern Rafah with the aim of dismantling the underground tunnel routes that remain in the area and the elimination of the fighters that are within them. In the past week, more than 40 fighters were eliminated in the areas of the tunnel control. And Israel just shows blurry drone video of them shooting at barely perceptible humans. So we don't have a solid understanding of who is being killed and if they're the fighters in question here. But yesterday, if we look at the next map, we can see a zoom in on the Rafah area, which gives us a much closer look. At the bottom there, the map is in Hebrew. In the bottom corner there, you see that's the Kerem Shalom crossing. A little bit up that border line between Egypt, that's the Rafah crossing that is supposed to open in both directions at the end of phase 1 of the deal, which is very close to happening. And that area in Eastern Rafah is where we are talking about. Yesterday, after a month of being attacked in ceasefire violations, yesterday fighters attacked the Israeli force that had come to the building that they were hiding out in. The tunnel had access to. The Israeli Defense Forces allowed publication of this matter yesterday, although they didn't show drone footage, which they have. That 5 of their soldiers were wounded, one seriously by Yasin 105 fire and a guerrilla action device that was affixed to the Namr troop carrier. The IDF report talks about the fighters exiting from the ruins in Rafah to defend them. To exit from the ruins in Rafah, end quote. They're defending themselves against this raid. And the Israelis say subsequently a 3rd militant who was not identified by our forces managed to approach and attach a guerrilla action device to the Namr. The IDF was searching the building where the 2 attackers emerged from a nearby underground cave. And we've seen that the fighters are in tunnels. They're also in caves, effectively inside the demolished buildings that Rafah is. So a pretty significant operation that happened in Rafah yesterday. And all of this points to something that we have covered for the whole 2-year war on the resistance report here. And that is that the fighters fight in territorial battalions. They don't leave their fighting positions and run to other fighting positions. They're not running all over Gaza harassing Israeli soldiers. They fight in their positions, which we've heard a number of times on video, one particularly from Sudanese poet Muhammad Abdel Bari, where he talks about the Battle of Uhud, and he says, "We will remain on the mountain of archers, and behind us the voice of the prophet shaking us, 'Do not leave, do not leave.'" This poem refers to the Battle of Uhud in the Quran, where the archers left their positions and it cost the Muslims the battle. So these fighters are literally staying in there on their Mount Uhud to carry out this battle. And when the lines were randomly cut there for the yellow line, they ended up on the other side of that line. And we've seen this territorial defense all over Gaza. It's why when the IDF invaded Zaytun 6, 7, 8 times, there was fighters there to meet them every time. Or in Deir al-Balah, where there was no invasion until the last days of the war, still the first moment the Israelis moved in, they're hit by those territorial units. So we know these fighters are in Rafah holding their positions. If we look at the next map, you can see what, or the next slide, you can see what Rafah looks like. It's a very difficult environment to be a resistance fighter in. All of the buildings are destroyed. It's a shoot to kill zone. It's been a free fire zone since the summer of 2024, so a year and a half now. But these fighters are still operating in Rafah, and this is the Rafah model that you're looking at. This photo here, for people that can't see it, we're looking at the moonscape that used to be the society of Rafah that has been completely erased. Like the mayor, Dr. Ahmed Sufi stated that the public squares everywhere in Rafah has been completely annihilated, calling it a disaster area, completely destroyed more than 90% of the homes in the Rafah governorate, which amounts to over 20,000 buildings containing 50,000 housing units. They destroyed all the wells. They destroyed the power plant, the water filtration plants. All of this is what is called the Rafah model. And Israel has been using this model with the attempt to create another state. There was a Wall Street Journal article in late November talking about how the U.S. wanted to create a green zone in Rafah, where it would be separate from the resistance, separate from the Palestinian governance that would be created in the eastern area of Rafah, which is a silent, implicit understanding that Hamas is not going anywhere. The disarmament is not happening. But the idea of building on the eastern side is opposed by the Israeli cabinet, who doesn't want rebuilding to happen that close to the border again. But you can see in this picture by the New York Times, and I bring this picture from the New York Times because in spite of it being the New York Times, because it just shows that everybody knows that Rafah has been destroyed. Even the most pro-Israel newspapers admit that and show that. And in Israel, it's bragged about. We could take a look at the next slide, because what Israel has been doing in this area is setting up military positions. More than 40 military bases have been set up across Gaza on the eastern side of the yellow line. Half of those, you can see the dots there, half of them are in southern Khan Yunis and Rafah area. So they have two brigades dedicated to finding these fighters. They have 13 sites in Rafah and another 11 in Khan Yunis, and they can't find these dozens of fighters that are still in Rafah. And remember, the Rafah Brigade, we were told the Rafah Brigade was defeated. The IDF said they were defeated in the summer of 2024. A few months later, we saw footage of Yahya Sinwar on the front lines commanding operations in Tel Sultan with the Tel Sultan battalion commander Mahmoud Hamdan, clearly showing that the Rafah Brigade had not been defeated. After that, we saw a whole series of actions from the Rafah Brigade called Operation Avenging Sinwar, after Sinwar was killed in October of that year. Immediately, the Rafah Brigade came up with a whole series of operations. Same when the ceasefire was breached by Israel. in March. In April, immediately, the Rafah Brigade carried out operations, and the IDF visited at that time, even though they had said they had defeated the Rafah Brigade on 2 other occasions. Chief of Staff 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐿 returned to the Gaza Strip and told fighters, Israeli soldiers in Gaza, that you return to fight in the Gaza Strip. I expect you to defeat the Rafah Brigade and lead to victory where you are fighting. They obviously did not defeat the Rafah Brigade at that time either. If we look at the next slide, you can see the Israelis are actually using this territory right now in the ceasefire to do what they could not do during the war, which was try to find tunnel routes. And you can see here, this is a picture from the Israeli military. It's a handout picture of auger machines searching for tunnels by literally poking holes in the ground to find tunnel routes that they had been bragging about during the war that they had demolished. But we know now, watching this, that there's no way this kind of contraption could have been set up in contested territory where the resistance was fighting. Zamir said that the other day that there is no chief of staff deal concerning the trapped fighters. What he did say to the Israeli security cabinet last Thursday, he said, it's either surrender or we eliminate them. If they surrender, we'll take them in their underwear to Sidi Taiman for interrogation. So veiled rape threats there at Israel's torture prison. But the fighters aren't going to surrender to the Israelis. Anyone who's been following this war knows that that's the case. But let's look at the context of this. If we look at the next slide, you can see this. This is the Civil Military Coordination Center in Kiryat Gat. This is in southern Israel. We're looking at an image right now of rows of desks of American and Israeli soldiers, 200 soldiers from Central Command from the United States sitting at desks right now. In this photo, you can see dozens of them, all on computer screens with 2 massive screens being projected on the wall. On the left side, it says the number of significant acts, in other words, ceasefire violations. You can see that on I snipped this out of the background of the Al Jazeera report, but it's very interesting. You can see no significant acts within 24 hours. So they're finding here at the Civil Military Coordination Center that there are no significant ceasefire breaches in the past 48 hours. And as we know, there has not been a 48-hour period since the ceasefire began that Israel has not violated the ceasefire. So it gives you a good idea of what they count as ceasefire violations in this center. On the right-hand side, we can see a massive map. And again, a map that's not very specific. It looks different than the maps that were the more specific ones I showed earlier in this segment. And you can see below them live drone footage from Israeli, but also from American MQ-9 Reaper drones that we know are now flying over Gaza, getting good quality drone film footage being broadcast live stream directly into this command center. So when we hear about these ceasefire violations and we look at what we're seeing on this map right now, you can see the role that the Americans are playing in this process. There's, like I said, 200 CENTCOM soldiers. There's also soldiers from other nations. There's a few soldiers from Canada, from European nations. So this is a very telling picture that I just snagged out of a larger report from Al Jazeera, just because it showed what was on the wall. And you can spend a lot of time understanding what level of understanding of the ceasefire violations that the Americans have. We can see the next slide as well. These American soldiers looking at another map that looks even slightly different than the 2 maps that we showed before. But we're looking at a map that's on the wall behind a number of soldiers that are working on the ceasefire monitoring. Recently, Army Radio commented on this when they did a tour of the facility as well. When they did their tour, the Israeli military censored everything that was on the wall. So you didn't see any of this background detail that I think is really telling. the Army radio report said that Israel is facing a significant test these days and is required to reshape the security reality in the Gaza Strip, the policy, and also set precedents. The enemy must be assessed not only to be the final results of its actions, even a shooting incident without casualties must be responded to as if a soldier was killed. In other words, massacre the civilian population, like we saw yesterday in the tent massacres that followed the resistance operation in Rafah, the burning of tents in Khan Yunis. Army radio says the American command is definitely involved. The IDF gave advance notice of the intention to strike, but did not wait for a green light or approval for the attack, nor did it update on the targets of the strike or who they intended to eliminate. Here, again, every event sets a precedent for the future and shapes the reality ahead. So from the Israeli point of view, they're not really telling the command center what their operations are. They're just letting the operations center watch, and the operations center seems to have no problem with that. There's one more here, number 10, if we can go and see that. There you can see soldiers gathered around higher resolution than anything we've seen from the Israelis, of drone footage that is being monitored 24/7 in this facility in southern Israel. This is described as a warehouse in southern Israel. It's not on a military base, but a number of Israeli military commentators bristle at this idea that the Americans are set up within their territory as an act against their sovereignty, and they worry what it's going to look like when another president that's not Trump is in charge of this situation. So just to let people have a good understanding of what the Americans are seeing on the ground about this situation. If we go to the next slide, you can see 𝐓𝐡𝐞 has responded to this. They put out this poster the other day that said, "Surrender is not in our dictionary. In vain, they try to uproot us. We will sprout from blood. We are the roots, and our branches reach to the sky," it says. And you can see there with the olive tree, with the Palestinian flag. You can see the AK-47 on the bottom. The fighters are not going to surrender. The 𝐓𝐡𝐞 brigades issued a statement that said the enemy should know that in our lexicon or in our dictionary, there's surrendering or handing oneself over to the occupier has no meaning. This is from a larger statement by 𝐓𝐡𝐞. This is the only fulsome statement that they have delivered about this. Is from early November. They say the occupation bears full responsibility for the clashes with our fighters in Rafah who are defending themselves inside an area under its control. The enemy must know that the principle of surrender and handing over oneself to the enemy does not exist in the lexicon of the Al-Qassam brigades. We place before the mediators their responsibilities, and they must find a solution to ensure the continuation of the ceasefire to prevent the enemy from using flimsy pretexts to violate it and to exploit that to target the innocent civilians of Gaza, which is what Israel is doing. It's what they did yesterday after the attack on their soldiers. They carried out massacres in tent camps in Khan Yunis that Nora reported on in the newscast. If you haven't checked that out, if you didn't catch that, you should check it out when it's posted as a solo video. And one more from 𝐓𝐡𝐞 here. Their fighters here saying that the conviction of our rifles can never be defeated. We're looking at 3 hands of fighters on top of each other, dirtied from the tunnels. There's a tunnel in the background. Presumably that's a Quran, although we've seen the fighters reading all kinds of nationalist literature and literature by their leaders, but we're going to assume that that's a Quran that they're have their hands on. Underneath it is their AK, and on the ground in the rubble there it says Rafah. So that's a statement from the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 brigades about this. And the spokesperson for Hamas, Hazem Qassem, who's in Gaza, said those fortified in Rafah are marks of glory and signs of pride for everyone who belongs to this nation. And one last slide here, the second to last handover of Israeli captives is happening right now. Here we're looking at a photo of Soraya Al-Quds and 𝐓𝐡𝐞 and the ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross, doing the handover. there is now only one remaining captive's body in Gaza. And you can see here, and we've seen this in the last few handovers, that 𝐄𝐥𝐿 𝐈𝐧𝐭𝐫𝐿 held these bodies, not Qassam, which is something that we knew all along, that other groups were holding many of these bodies, particularly of the non-soldiers. And the statement said from 𝐄𝐥𝐿 𝐈𝐧𝐭𝐫𝐿 and the Qassam Brigades yesterday that within the framework of the Al-Aqsa flood prisoner exchange, 𝐄𝐥𝐿 𝐈𝐧𝐭𝐫𝐿 and the martyr Izzeddin al-Qassam Brigades will hand over the body of one of the occupation's prisoners, which has been found in the north of the Gaza Strip today at 5 p.m. That is the 27th of 28 to be handed over. So the difficult task of finding all of the Israeli captives is virtually complete. The 20 living soldiers were handed back, and most of these 28 have been soldiers or security forces. So that is the resistance report for day 790 of Israel's genocidal war in Gaza.
Thank you so much, John. I mean, just several things. The image, you know, every time I see that image of Rafah and what Israel has done to it.
Red line.
Yeah, right, exactly.
The
all eyes on
Democratic
Rafah. Remember
parties
that?
and Joe Biden's red line.
Right,
That's what I thought listening to John and looking at those horrific images.
Just absolutely horrific.
They said it was a red line.
Mm-hmm.
And they destroyed Rafah even more than they've destroyed Gaza City.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the extraordinary thing.
Yeah.
And up until that point, Rafah was relatively unscathed. So if the United States had meant what it said, that was a red line, they could have stopped that destruction. It's unforgivable.
They could have stopped it all.
Instead, it became a model. It became a model. Instead of a red line, it literally became the Rafah model, which is that was the point in the war where Israel said, we're actually just destroying, we're making it so no one can live here.
Right.
Previous parts of the genocide, they at least had some sort of pretext, but in Rafah, they just destroyed it all. And that picture, I wanted to show you a picture from the ground level, because sometimes, you know, we bring this satellite footage to you to show you how the land has just been erased. But looking at the satellite footage, it's not always easy to connect with your brain that these are people's homes. That
hospitals,
shot from the ground,
fields, universities,
stores, everything.
Kindergartens, everything.
They destroyed everything, all the hospitals, all the sanitation, all the water, all the electricity, all the houses, the schools.
And where are all those people now? You know, there was hundreds of thousands of people in Rafah. You know, all the people in Gaza City, all that destruction. Where are those people? Well, we're seeing the pictures of people sleeping in the open with freezing cold rain pouring down on them. And that hasn't changed. That's not getting better. I mean, it's just, it's outrageous.
It's outrageous.
And then, and this is going to segue into Ali's segment next. But in terms of, like you said, there's only one remaining Israeli captive's body somewhere in Gaza. And then after that is found and retrieved, it's supposed to trigger the second phase of the ceasefire deal.
Well, the negotiations for it, because because Qassam did not negotiate, and Hamas did not negotiate on the other points of the Trump plan. They negotiated on the first phase and said negotiations on the second phase will begin. So we'll see how that goes forward. But part of the first phase is that the Rafah crossing is supposed to be opened in both directions. So that is the next thing we have to keep our eyes on. Israel talked earlier this week about opening it only in one direction for people to leave, which violates the ceasefire. It's supposed to be a bilateral agreement between Egypt to open it in both directions so people can return home. People that left in the previous ceasefire for medical care are to be able to return, or anyone that left should, according to the deal, should be able to return.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how that goes, of course. All right. Thank you so much again, Jon, for that report. And Ali, you have a couple of segments that that we're going to get into now. First is, as I kind of alluded to, this so-called international security or stabilization force. I can't remember what they keep calling it. The Trump's plan for Gaza. He keeps saying over and over again that things are going great. This is the best ceasefire that's ever existed in the history of the world. Everyone's behind it. Meanwhile, what's actually happening here? Take us through what you've been recording and collecting over the last couple of weeks.
Thank you, Nora. And just a reminder, you're watching the Electronic Intifada live stream, and I'm Ali Abunimah. And on our last show, November 20th, we talked with international human rights lawyer and former UN official 𝐄𝐥𝐿 Mohammad about the outrageous Security Council resolution passed last month that gave the UN's blessing to Trump's so-called peace plan for Gaza. We've seen throughout this whole show from the start with the news brief that there is no peace in Gaza, there's no ceasefire. And you'll remember what 𝐄𝐥𝐿 Mohammad said, quote, "This resolution is a real direct assault on the Palestinian people, on their rights, on their hopes of liberation. It is an atrocity with the UN insignia on it." And Mohammad really said that it imposes neo-colonial control on Gaza. That's if they can implement it. Now, a key element of Trump's UN-endorsed plan is the creation of an international stabilization force authorized, quote, "to use all necessary measures to carry out its mandate, which includes disarming Palestinian resistance organizations." It also calls for the establishment of a so-called Board of Peace headed by Trump himself to govern and rebuild Gaza. Now, we've been reporting from the beginning that disarming the resistance against its will is an impossible task that no country is willing or able to do, especially after Israel, with full Western backing, spent more than 2 years perpetrating genocide and utterly failing to defeat the Palestinian resistance. But according to recent reports, not only are the US efforts to put together an international stabilization force stalled, they're actually moving in reverse. And I want to take a closer look at some of those reports now, starting from this big article that appeared in the Washington Post on November 29th with the headline, "International force at heart of Trump's Gaza plan struggles to find takers." And I'm just going to kind of read through some key points and comment on them. That's how I'm going to do this. It says the proposed deployment of an international force in Gaza, seen as a crucial feature of President Donald Trump's plan to bring peace to the enclave, is struggling to get off the ground as countries considered likely to contribute soldiers have grown wary. Concerns are mounting in foreign capitals over whether soldiers could be put in a position where they may be required to use force against Palestinians. That's a point we've made all along, that no one wants to sign up to fight the Qassam brigades. And according to the Washington Post, Indonesia, which had announced it would send as many as 20,000 peacekeeping troops, is now looking at providing a much smaller contingent. Azerbaijan, which had also been expected to send troops, has also reassessed, according to officials speaking to the Washington Post, and not one Arab country has committed to sending soldiers. A month ago, things were in a better place, said one regional official with knowledge of the discussions, the Washington Post reports. And then they say that even countries that are keen to win favor with the US administration, many uncertainties remain for them, including the thorny question of how the force would go about securing weapons from Hamas, which has sent mixed signals about its willingness to disarm. I don't think they've been mixed at all. They've been quite clear they won't be disarming in any context other than there being a real sovereign Palestinian state to which they can hand over their weapons. Quote, they want the international stabilizing force to come into Gaza and restore law and order and disarm any resistance, a senior official in Indonesia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said, as quoted in the Washington Post. So that's the problem. Nobody wants to do that, the official added. And then they detail that Indonesia, instead of this 20,000 that they talked about, is now talking about maybe sending 1,200 soldiers to do various tasks that definitely don't include fighting against the resistance. And according to the Washington Post, it says here, Middle East governments had rebuked Indonesia for going out ahead of them and committing peacekeepers, according to an official the Washington Post quotes. And now the Indonesians are saying they're going to focus on health and construction rather than anything to do with the force that is disarming the resistance. Notable here, too, according to the Washington Post, is that Gulf countries that had been expected to participate have cold feet, according to a regional official quoted by the Post. Anwar Gargash, a diplomatic advisor to the president of the United Arab Emirates, said earlier this month that his government does not see a clear framework for the force, according to the Washington Post. And that's really significant because the United Arab Emirates is one of the closest allies of Israel and the United States in the region. Quote, the ambiguity of this whole thing is not settling very well here in Abu Dhabi, said 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿, a prominent Emirati political scientist who described a 180-degree turn in the Emirates' willingness to send troops over the last year. And the same vagueness and uncertainty also applies to the so-called Board of Peace, which is supposed to be the civilian governance arm of this Trump peace plan. And the Washington Post says, the establishment of an international force is part of the second phase of Trump's plan, which also calls for a board of peace headed by Trump to oversee Gaza for 2 years. Then they quote another regional official, unnamed official, quote, we thought with the Security Council resolution, within 48 to 72 hours, the Board of Peace would be announced, but nothing, not even informally, has happened. So that gives a sense of the disarray there. And then finally, there is this little bit where, I don't know, maybe we should get Benjamin Netanyahu as a guest on the live stream because he seems to be expressing the same skepticism that we have. That's a joke, by the way. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has expressed skepticism over the feasibility of an international force, the Washington Post says. Quote, we said, go ahead, try. Netanyahu said of discussions with Washington during an interview last week with the Israeli social media outlet Abu Ali Express. Quote, they think international forces from different countries might disarm Hamas. Fine, you can try, end quote. Well, that's Netanyahu's view, which is apparently similar to our analysis that if the Israeli army can't do it, certainly Indonesia and Azerbaijan can't either. But this is the really sinister part of what Netanyahu is saying, according to the Washington Post. Israel is working on the assumption that it will eventually have to demilitarize Hamas itself because no one else will be willing, said Ofer Guterman, a senior researcher at the Institute for National Security Studies. So that's the conclusion, really, of the Washington Post story, and really provides us with some insight into why Israel is absolutely unwilling to declare an end to the war or to stop its genocide, because they want to go back to a full-throated genocide. Of course, the question, and this is where Jon's analysis is so helpful, is whether Israel is capable, and we still see no sign that they are. Now let's move to another article from the Washington Post, and this is a column yesterday from David Ignatius. He's a regular columnist, but he's a very reliable mouthpiece for deep state intelligence services and officials. And so you read him in order to understand what the government and intelligence services think. And he provides additional context around the disarray in Gaza in his column headlined, "The Middle East's Moment of Opportunity is Slipping Away." And he begins by saying that the past 2 years of war brought death and destruction to the Middle East, but they also created remarkable openings for change in Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, and Iran. So you can see the perspective of where he's coming from. However, he says, sadly, those opportunities might be squandered because of mishandling and delay by the United States, Israel, and the Arab states. Everything is stuck, a senior Israeli defense official told me this week. This is David Ignatius writing, because diplomats have failed to capitalize on the disarray of Iran and its allies. All the fronts in the Middle East are still open, he warned. And then Ignatius points out, he says, other than the release of all living Israeli hostages from Gaza, most of the goals of Trump's 20-point peace plans appear stillborn. Israel achieved some stunning successes in its bloody campaigns against Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran. But Robert Satloff, director of the Washington Institute, now that's a think tank set up by the Israel lobby group AIPAC. I'm telling you that David Ignatius doesn't disclose it at all. Robert Satloff cautioned in an interview this week that, quote, the Israelis have so far failed to translate battlefield victories into political achievements. These are sad and regrettable lost opportunities. Now, I point that out because that admission is important, that Israel's most fanatical supporters and representatives in Washington, as AIPAC and its think tanks are, don't see Israel as having won victories or succeeding. And that gives us a sense that all of the Israeli announcements of great victories and stunning successes, whether against Hamas, Hezbollah, or Iran, are hot air. What they really think is that they have failed. What Satloff is suggesting there, and this reflects the thinking of many officials and David Ignatius, as we'll see in a moment, is that it could have gone another way if they had been clever enough in, finding the right collaborators or training just the right number of Palestinian police, that, they could have taken that opportunity. What they don't seem to understand is that Israel's methods of massacres and destruction and genocide and assassinations of leaders don't work. They don't address Israel's fundamental issue, which is its illegitimacy in the eyes of the people of the region and their unwillingness to submit to living under its brutality and their unwillingness to give up their rights in favor of Zionism. And Ignatius goes deeper into sort of the hopes that, or rather he admits that Israel's war in Gaza, or its genocide in Gaza, illustrates, quote, the limits of Israeli military power to achieve political results. He concedes that Hamas still controls half of Gaza, where roughly 85% of the population live, and that the other elements, the Board of Peace and the Stabilization Force, are still, in his words, just a fantasy. Now, I'm going to end looking at his article with this paragraph. I'll read it and then I'll comment on it. How can Trump and his partners break this logjam? They can recognize the screamingly obvious fact that the only force that can effectively disarm Hamas will be Palestinians allied with a reformed version of the Palestinian Authority. Many Israeli military and security officials have long embraced this view. So what Ignatius is saying here is that what we need is a Palestinian civil war, that we need Palestinians allied with the reformed Palestinian Authority to disarm Hamas, and that this is the vision of many Israeli military and security officials, which he's trying to launder in the pages of the Washington Post as common sense. But of course, we've seen how when Israel tries that time and time again, it fails. And of course, the United States sponsored the original civil war between Hamas and Fatah back in 2006 after Hamas won those Palestinian legislative elections. And what's also interesting in Ignatius's stenography of official thinking is that there is no mention whatsoever of Palestinian rights. And in his column, there isn't even a cursory mention of a Palestinian state. That is where official thinking is, that the question of Palestine is merely one of finding the right caliber bullets to kill the right Palestinians and to find the right collaborators to rule the survivors on behalf of the colonial occupier. These people just are incapable of conceiving that the Palestinians are a people with rights, dignity, and determination to win their liberation. And that's why these schemes, no matter how much death and destruction they cause, will fail time and time again. And that brings me to the next article. You may have been wondering all this time, where are the sensible, reasonable Europeans? Well, here they are. They're working with Egypt to try to set up a force of Palestinian collaborators to go into Gaza. And we have, from just the past couple of days, this really lengthy report from the Times of Israel with the headline, Egypt and EU stepping up preparations to dispatch Palestinian police force to Gaza. And as is often the case, that headline is somewhat misleading, because if you were only going to read the headline, you'd think they were just about ready to send these forces in. When you read the article, you find that they are also in just as much disarray as the so-called International Stabilization Force. And let's take a look at just some of the key passages of this article and what they reveal about the political intent of those behind this scheme. The article starts off saying Egypt and the European Union are preparing to expand training of Palestinian police for deployment in Gaza under US President Donald Trump's 20-point peace plan for the Strip. 2 diplomats and a foreign official briefed on the issue have told the Times of Israel. The force, like many components of the US framework, remains largely aspirational, said the officials, who include an Arab and a European diplomat. So David Ignatius called the Trump's plan a fantasy, and here the New York Times is calling it, or rather the Times of Israel is calling it largely aspirational. And they detail how really nothing about it has been finalized. But the goal is a rehashing of the same old plans that they've tried time and again, which is just what David Ignatius proposed, to pit Palestinians against each other, to try to recruit Palestinians to do what the Israeli army couldn't do, and here in the guise of a police force. And the Times of Israel says, before the war, Gaza was policed by an estimated 5,000 to 10,000 officers serving under the auspices of Hamas, which has controlled the Gaza Strip since 2007. But is supposed to cede power under the Trump plan. Now, of course, as John pointed out, Hamas didn't agree to any of the other points in the Trump plan, except the first phase, which had to do with the ceasefire and the exchange of prisoners and the entry of humanitarian aid provisions, all of which Israel is still violating. And when I say Hamas, I mean Hamas and all the other resistance factions together in a united front. the Times of Israel says, in place of Hamas, that is, the international community is seeking to install an armed Palestinian force tasked with day-to-day law enforcement. And then they talk about, I won't go into all the detail about, just the arrangements Egypt and the EU are doing and the training they're trying to do, with Jordan involved as well. And they say that one of the key things they want to do is bring in former officers of the Palestinian Authority security forces who are loyal to the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah and Mahmoud Abbas, who continued to receive Palestinian Authority salaries after 2007, even though they were just sitting at home. And that's where they're hoping to find thousands of people to join the police. They say, according to the Times of Israel, since 2007, some 7,000 police officers are believed to have remained in Gaza on the PA payroll. Michael Milstein, a senior researcher at Tel Aviv University's Dayan Center, said few officers likely remain fit for reintegration after nearly 2 decades away from the police work. So now they're suggesting, and this is where it gets somewhat comical, that those guys who have been sitting at home for 20 years, getting salaries, who are incapable of going out, and carrying guns and being in the street, can sit at desks and do bureaucratic work, and they'll find other people to go out into the streets, but it's not clear where. But what is clear in the article, they say here, the European diplomat said most of the 3,000 officers the EU hopes to train would come from Gaza and be trained in Egypt, though the exact site is not finalized. And here's really the crucial line that tells you what this force is about. The Times of Israel says, vetting would be handled by Israel and the US. So this, you can put Egypt's name on it. You can put the, do-gooder Europeans. They're going to be the ones paying for it. But vetting would be handled by Israel and the US. So this force would be handpicked by the United States, Israel, to serve as traitors and collaborators against the Palestinian people in the service of schemes backed by Arab regimes to destroy the Palestinian people and their cause. That is when you distill all this babble down, that's always what you get to. And there are also, I'll just end my look at the Times of Israel article with this. On paper, they always say, well, this is about providing policing and security to ordinary Gazans. But they're very open about the political goals here. And the Times of Israel says both Egypt and the EU see the police as a key entry point for reaching Gazans on the ground and shaping the Strip's post-war recovery. In other words, they say, quote, the police force could also enable a gradual, non-violent transition of power by providing a viable non-Hamas security presence. A third foreign official said members of the force could form the next leadership of Gaza, including future intelligence heads. So this is about installing a collaborator leadership, not one elected by Palestinians. Finally, and this takes me into some of the news that came out today, towards the end of the Times of Israel article, they talk about whether these, we've covered them before, these ISIS-linked, Israeli-backed gangs of criminals and collaborators, Palestinian criminals and collaborators backed by Israel, that Israel has been using and supporting to terrorize people in Gaza, to steal aid, and setting them up as kind of a proxy force to maintain chaos in Gaza, whether they would be integrated into the police force. And the Times of Israel says, local armed militias opposed to Hamas also operate, some having cooperated with Israel during the war, and some still protecting civilians in IDF-held areas. At least one report suggested such militias might be integrated into the police force. And this reminds me of, how to broaden the scope, we've seen the Europeans and the Americans integrating literal neo-Nazis, Sieg Heiling, swastika-tattooed Nazis into the official armed forces of Ukraine on the one hand, and we see how they're supporting a so-called government closely tied with ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria, and they would like to do the same here, to place ISIS-linked gangs into the official police force that they hope to send into Gaza. And they talk about, the Times of Israel says, militia leader Hussam al-Astal said he received messages from American representatives indicating that his group and others could play a role in Gaza's future police force. Now, the Israeli analyst Milstein is actually the one to pour cold water on this. He says, according to the Times of Israel, that such groups are small and widely viewed as criminals, narcotics runners, or collaborators. He argued integrating them would have obvious negative effects. That, of course, has never deterred the European, American, and Arab allies of Israel. But I think the biggest blow to any such scheme came today with the news of the killing of Yasser Abu Shabab. He is, of course, the best known Palestinian collaborator in Israel, the head of an Israeli-backed ISIS-linked criminal gang that Israel has unleashed on parts of Gaza over the last 2 years. And you can see there his picture in a tweet from Rami Abdo, the Palestinian human rights defender from Gaza, saying Hebrew news channels report the killing of informant Yasser Abu Shabab, leader of militias collaborating with the Israeli occupation, along with his assistant informant Ghassan al-Dukhani. Both had previously been linked to ISIS before openly working for Israel. Now, the circumstances of Abu Shabab's killing are murky. Israeli forces at first tried to portray it as sort of internecine violence or clan violence, while unconfirmed reports said that it was actually an operation carried out by the resistance. And this seems to be supported by a tweet from Shai Levy of Mako, which is an Israeli news outlet affiliated with Israel's Channel 12. And he says there, quote, Yasser Abu Shabab was eliminated because he aided Israel in the fighting, and especially in violations of Gaza's ceasefire agreement. Beyond that, nothing more can be written because censorship is being used in a draconian manner to conceal a strategic mishap that has already begun to follow up. Now, undoubtedly, more information will come out. The important point here is that Israel, the United States, the European Union, and perhaps some of the Arab tyrannies allied with them were placing their hopes on anti-Palestinian collaborators like Abu Shabab to try to restore or to try to install in Gaza a regime to their liking and that would serve their and Israel's interests and not the Palestinian people. What the killing of Yasser Abu Shabab does is it really is a death blow to those fantasies. And it will certainly concentrate the minds of any of those few other Palestinians who would think about collaborating with Israel on such a schemes, even perhaps in the context of the so-called International Stabilization Force or the police, of the futility of doing so, that Israel is absolutely unwilling and unable to protect them.
Ali, thank you so much for breaking all of that down. And we've talked about this before, but this, like, the colonial arrogance that, Jared Kushner and the Trump administration and Israel and, the PA are all talking about how, we have a plan, that Hamas and Qassam brigades they'll be so excited about this plan that requires them to surrender and disarm. And they're going to be, they're just going to fall in line. And they're very sure of this. It's like, I don't know. It's this fantasy that they just keep trying to recycle over and over and over.
Yeah, and I didn't. Yeah. I wanted to go into it, but I didn't want to throw too much at everyone at once. But really, the Jared Kushner's plan is, and he seems to be key, as John said, him and Steve Witkoff are running the show. Mm-hmm. They have this fantasy of what they call alternative secure communities, which is, I don't know, maybe they asked GTP, can you come up with a more media-friendly term for concentration camps?
It's very like tech
they came up with alternative secure communities. And the idea here is, and it's one that's been tried so many times, and it's such a racist idea that, if you we'll have these concentration camps on the Israeli-controlled side of the Yellow Line, where people will be allowed to have food, medicine. We'll be building, I don't know, high-rise towers or whatever it is, and people will be drawn there. People on the Hamas controlled side of Gaza will say, "Oh, look how good life is in the Jared Kushner towns. So we're going to go and live under Israeli rule in the Jared Kushner towns." But the key to this was these were going to be policed by collaborator gangs. So this is also a severe blow to the whole Jared Kushner fantasy as well.
It's like what the Americans tried to do in South Vietnam with the strategic hamlets, and that it was, against the National Liberation Forces. Against the French and the American military occupation. That too was a failure. They're trying to build these zones, and it was just a way to establish
because they're incapable of conceiving. Colonizers, and this is true throughout history and across the world in the past 500 years of Western barbarism in Africa and Latin America, North America, as they are now, and across Asia, is they can't conceive of their victims as communities who have their own sense of identity, their own goals, their own dignity, their own determination to live free from such tyranny. They think of them as just, bodies that eat. And if you wave, I don't know, some peanut butter or granola bars across the bar from the other side of the barbed wire fence, that they're all going to come running over and say, yes, we'll do what you want. Yeah. And they tried that with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. They've tried it time and time again. And nowhere in this discourse, you can read through all these articles, did they talk about Palestinian rights? Right. Not even the EU, who pretends, the EU, one of the most violent, racist organizations on the planet, still markets itself as, human rights and apple pie and everything. They don't even use that rhetoric anymore with the Palestinians. They only talk in these military and security firms, and who can we bribe, and who can we entice to come to our side, and who can we train to go and fight for Israel against the other Palestinians. Yeah. These are evil plans, really evil plans, and none of them will succeed, but they cause tremendous suffering in the meantime.
There's a long history of this, right? Like the Fatah forces, the coup forces that tried to overthrow the Hamas election, they were numbered in the tens of thousands. They were well equipped. They were rooted on the land. They had been in control for a decade and a half or more even. since Oslo, and they were dismantled by 𝐓𝐶𝐞 in literally hours. I covered that battle. It spread over several months, but the actual combat was short and swift, and they overthrew tens of thousands of security officials, security forces, trained security forces backed by the US, and they couldn't defeat them. So now they think that
because, John, sorry to interrupt, because people will fight for their rights, for their dignity, for their families, for their communities. They won't fight for a $300 a month salary from the European Union. They will take the salary. Sure, they'll take it as long as they can just march around in a square. But when you tell them, go kill those other Palestinians, €300 salary isn't going to do it.
The whole world has watched for 2 years as those other Palestinians have been bombed 100,000 times, $25 billion in US weapons given to Israel to destroy 𝐓𝐶𝐞. And today, they can't find a few dozen of them under their control for more than a year and a half in Rafah. So it's just, there's a lack of seriousness to this whole discourse, and a deep lack of knowledge of the Gaza Strip.
Say a little more, John. I mean, when you were in Gaza 20 years ago, covering the fight between Fatah and Hamas, what parallels can you, like, how does that inform what the US and the EU and Israel want for Gaza in terms of this, like, so, training new police forces? You also covered the Dayton forces after that. Keith Dayton, the US Marine who was in charge of training Palestinian Authority security officials in Jordan. Like, what kind of patterns did you see, and what kind of chance does this, Dayton forces of today have in a place like Gaza?
I don't have the numbers off the tip of my head right now, but the security forces out of Oslo, the PA security forces, had the largest security force to population ratio of anywhere in the world. And 𝐓𝐶𝐞, who in 2006 was coming out of the Intifada, which attacked them hard, they lost a lot of their cadre and leadership. And still in that moment, they destroyed the Fatah forces, the coup forces. They destroyed them. We're talking now a generation later, where there's been a programmatized development of a national army under the 𝐓𝐶𝐞 Brigade's leadership and the Joint Operations Room, which brings in the other factions, including the factions that one would believe would fight with Fatah, to fight under a unified command. And it's such a success of this war that the Joint Operations Room and the unity of position, the unity of the resistance, the unity of their messaging, from all different factions across the board. That's the message that's coming out of this war, is that the unification of the Palestinian project was what helped make it be successful in Gaza. So people in Gaza see that, and they're not going to be clamoring. Look, Abu Shabab had food, medicine, warehouses, ATVs, trucks from Israel. People didn't go flooding across there was no yellow line at that time. People could have just walked and joined his forces. They didn't do that. Not even his family did it. His family disowned him. There is no support whatsoever for this kind of action in Gaza right now, even by people who dislike Hamas, because it is seen as coming on the heels of a 2-year genocide that was looking to annihilate the entire Palestinian civilization. For people to collaborate at this point in the war is something that's so far beyond anything that's ever happened before in Palestine. And that kind of the anger at Israel, people aren't angry at Hamas. They're angry at Israel. They know who tries to kill them. They know who successfully destroyed their schools, their hospitals, their jobs, their commercial agriculture, the whole deal. They know who did that. The person who wants to then ally himself with that project, there's no legitimacy for that in Gaza. If there was, we would have seen it when people were at their most desperate, when they were being starved for literally months. The siege after the ceasefire was collapsed by Israel was 90 days of no trucks at all getting into Gaza. Abu Shabab had entire warehouses full of food, medicine, fuel, cars. People didn't go flooding across the border to that. They were willing to starve rather than join his ragtag collaborator army, which honestly never got more than dozens of fighters. Sometimes you see exaggerations that said hundreds of fighters, but there was not hundreds of fighters. He had a very small group, and people in Europe thinking that he would be the next government in Gaza are just not serious.
Well, and one other thing on this, just to broaden it up, this is the model. Collaborative puppet regimes is their model across the region. They're trying to do the same thing in Lebanon, where they do have a puppet government as the official government in Beirut. And their frustration is that the puppet government is unwilling and incapable of defeating Hezbollah, the resistance in Lebanon. They'll never get any militia in Lebanon that's willing or able to do that. But that's their goal. They want puppet leaders in Lebanon. They want puppet leaders in Syria. They wanted puppet leaders in Iraq. And that's what they want in Iran. When we hear David Ignatius say, they said Israel's successes in Iran, and it was a total failure from Israel's perspective. But by successes, I don't know. I think what they mean is as escalating sabotage in order to try to bring about regime change in Tehran and to impose U.S. and Israel-friendly puppets and collaborators. The U.S. and Israel and all their collaborators in the region, they're united in opposition to democracy, liberation, and self-determination. This is the thing they can never allow the people in the region to have, because all of them will be swept away by that. They know that. So they have to fight tooth and nail against any kind of democracy. You take just all that, as I said, all that discourse about the Palestinian people. Nowhere in there is anything anymore about, even in the Trump peace plan, there's like a throwaway paragraph at the end about, if the Palestinians learn to stand on one toe and twirl around and, while juggling 12 balls in the air and do that while hopping across hot coals, then maybe one day in the far distant future, the fog will lift and a path will emerge towards the prospect of the possibility of thinking about, maybe we'll sing a song about a Palestinian state in the far distant future when, unicorns roam the planet. We have to keep bringing it back to liberation. People in the region are fighting for their liberation from the forces of imperialism and Zionism, and it's aided and abetted by Europe. They are fully on board. Any naive notion that the Europeans are not as committed to this genocide as the Americans are is false. And the Arab tyrannies of the region, even if they don't support it, they're not willing to risk their thrones in order to stop it. And that's where we are. And so people around the world have to not let up in protesting their government's commitment to this genocide. We can't let them rebrand it. They are trying to rebrand this genocide as a ceasefire or a peace plan. We cannot allow it.
The resistance has been very clear that this force will be seen as an occupying force and treated as such. And they are dignified. They are hospitable to diplomacy. And so they don't yell and scream it from the rooftops, but they have said it at key moments. And it was heard in those governments that were, saying that they were going to put troops on the ground to disarm 𝐤𝐿 and 𝐓𝐡𝐞, that the resistance has spoken in one voice, that those people will be treated as occupiers. And so they're going to have to set up some kind of group that's more capable than the US and Israel, which combined have carried out this genocide for 2 years and failed militarily to disarm anybody. They didn't even get people in individual battle spaces to give up their arms, to be taken prisoner. So it's just, it doesn't stand a chance.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Amazing. Ali, there's one more story that you want to comment on, and this has to do, of course, with Zionist campaign against a UN special rapporteur. Why don't you bring us up to date on that, and then we'll be back right after that.
Thanks, Nora. And just again, a reminder that you're watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. And what I want to talk about now is that Israel is waging a smear campaign against Rima Salem. She's the UN Special Rapporteur on violence against women and girls, and they're demanding her resignation. Here you can see a tweet from the Israeli Foreign Ministry claiming, quote, Rima Salem denies Hamas rape documented by Hamas itself. In fact, to date, Israel has not been able to identify a single victim, living or dead, of supposed mass rapes across the whole of southern Israel by Hamas fighters on October 7th, 2023, as regular viewers and readers of the Electronic Intifada will already know. And here's another story from the Times of Israel. You can see the headline there. Rabbis, Jewish leaders call for removal of UN official who denied October 7th rape. So you can see that this is clearly a full-on Zionist campaign, and you're going to be hearing a lot more about it. So what is Rima Salem's supposed transgression? It's that she posted this factual statement on Twitter X on November 14th, quote, no Palestinian applauded rape in Gaza. No independent investigation found that rape took place on the 7th of October. And that's actually the few times that I'm aware of where any kind of person associated with the UN has stated the truth so clearly and bluntly. That is an absolutely accurate statement from Rima Salem. First of all, Israel has not permitted any independent investigations to take place. And second, two major UN-led examinations of the matter both state that they were unable to verify a single case of rape. And I want to go back again and to that claim from the Israeli Foreign Ministry in the tweet attacking Rima Salem. So let's read it again. Listen to the words, quote, Rima Salem denies Hamas rape documented by Hamas itself. We've debunked this claim many times that Hamas documented or filmed rapes itself. And I just want to go over some of that again very quickly. This is a key report from the Israeli newspaper Haaretz from April 2024. By the way, it's an article that's trying to support and establish that rapes took place. But as you can read in the article, Israeli authorities have no evidence of the kind that the foreign ministry today claims exists. And since this Haaretz article was really pushing the claim of the rapes, I think it's very significant that they admitted this. Quote, this is from the Haaretz article. from inquiries put to 3 bodies in the defense establishment by Haaretz, it emerges that the intelligence material collected by the police and the intelligence bodies, including footage from terrorists' body cameras, does not contain visual documentation of any acts of rape themselves. So again, this absolutely contradicts this fake claim being made by the Israeli Foreign Ministry. Now, let's look at one of those UN reports, the one published by Pramila Patten, the UN Secretary General's advisor on sexual violence and armed conflict, that was published in March last year, and which, by the way, is often cited as proving that rapes took place. We've covered this report before many times, and the report tries to spin things in a way to support Israel's narrative. But when you actually really read it, you find that it comes up short. And so, for example, paragraph 34 of the report says that the UN mission team, specifically the forensic pathologist and the digital analyst, reviewed over 5,000 photos, around 50 hours, and several audio files of footage of the attacks, provided partly by various state agencies, that's Israeli state agencies, and through an independent online review of various open sources to identify potential instances and indications of conflict-related violence. And what did they find? Well, we see that in paragraph 74, quote, in the medico-legal assessment of available photos and videos, no tangible indications of rape could be identified. So remember, we're talking about an organized campaign of mass rapes taking place at multiple sites across Israel. Everyone's got their phone out. Everyone's filming everything that's going around, and not a single one of these attacks was captured in a photo or a video. Incredible, isn't it? And then we have from paragraph 77 of the Pramila Patten report, quote, while the mission team reviewed extensive digital material depicting a range of egregious violations, no digital evidence specifically depicting acts of sexual violence was found in open sources. So it's not just, so they got video from Israel, from Israeli groups, and also they looked all over the internet, couldn't find any evidence. And now let's look at a few key passages of the report that was published by the UN's Independent Commission of Inquiry into the events of October 7th, and this was published in June of 2024. You can see there the cover of the report. And let's look at a few key passages in the report that directly address the Israeli government's claims in the context of its attack on the 𝐓𝐻𝐿. In paragraph 16, the UN Commission of Inquiry says, the Commission also sent a request for information to Israel in March 2024, inquiring about additional information in relation to rape and other forms of sexual violence, including evidence of any instructions provided to the perpetrators directly responsible for the attack on 7 October 2023 to carry out such acts, or information on specific cases of gender-based crimes on 7 October 2023, including cases of rape and other forms of sexual violence. It has not received a response. And then let's look at paragraph 17 of the UN Commission of Inquiry report, quote, the Commission notes the absence of forensic evidence of sexual crimes committed on 7 October. And then in paragraph 18, the Commission has not met any survivors of sexual violence committed on 7 October, despite its attempts to do so. And now, finally, let's look at paragraph 138 of the Commission Inquiry report, which sums everything up. It says, quote, in relation to rape, the Commission has seen open source reports stating that Israeli civilians were subjected to rape and other forms of sexual violence at various sites in southern Israel on 7 October. The Commission has reviewed testimonies obtained by journalists and the Israeli police concerning rape, but has not been able to independently verify such allegations. It also says the commission was unable to verify reports of sexualized torture and genital mutilation. Additionally, the commission found some specific allegations to be false, inaccurate, or contradictory with other evidence or statements and discounted these from its assessment. So there you go. No independent inquiry has ever verified that a rape took place on October 7th. The statement made by UN Special Rapporteur 𝐓𝐴𝐚𝐝 𝐈𝐧𝐭𝐫𝐨𝐧𝐢 is 100% true. Now, you may be saying, well, the reports you cited, Ali, weren't those from a year ago or more? Yes, some of them were. But this complete lack of evidence is still the situation. And you may remember that in July, Asa Winstanley and I reported on an effort to revive the mass rapes hoax by an Israeli propaganda outfit called the Dina Project, funded by the British government. As we reported at the time, the Dina Project was not able to come up with any new evidence to support the claim, and nobody else has either. You can find our full report on the Electronic Intifada YouTube channel. It's called, quote, "Israel revives 7 October mass rapes hoax with same old lies."
It's just astonishing that we have to keep debunking this over and over and over again. But, you know, this is the currency that they trade in, lies and hoaxes. And, you know, and the fact that the corporate media is still, you know, the New York Times still hasn't retracted its bombshell hoax story that Jeffrey Gettleman and the others wrote. It's depressing.
And on your last point, Ali, about this, you know, when you were making this sort of devil's advocate point about this, you know, these potentially being older sources, the Dina, you know, in addition to what you said, the Dina Project is still going around on tours around the world, basically saying the same thing, saying and admitting, you know, they're saying the same nonsense, but also in passing admitting that there was no evidence of these claims, that there was no actual physical evidence, no visual evidence of any of these, you know, supremely exaggerated at best is the most generous thing you could say about them, but really fabricated,
completely
claims.
Fabricated. Yeah.
This is just, you know, the other part of the story. I suppose I think back to conversations we've had with Craig Mohaber and others, is the cowardice of UN officials. You know, people who have this sacred responsibility to the most vulnerable people on earth, to protect them, to protect their human rights, and how time and again the top leadership of the UN has caved into these intimidation campaigns by the Israel lobby, the smearing, the lying, the bullying, the pressuring. And you could see that Times of Israel report, they're recruiting, you know, rabbis and Jewish groups to come in and pressure the UN to try to have 𝐓𝐴𝐚𝐝 𝐈𝐧𝐭𝐫𝐴𝐚 fired from her role as special rapporteur. And the special rapporteurs, you know, like Francesca Albanese is one of them. These are unpaid positions. They're independent human rights experts appointed by the UN Human Rights Council. And that's why they are able to say the truth. That's why 𝐓𝐴𝐚𝐝 𝐈𝐧𝐭𝐫𝐴𝐚 can come out and say this. And I hope she won't be intimidated into backing down in any way. I don't think she has, and I hope she won't. But that's how they do it. They try to bully people into retracting. And it's really important to understand how it works and to use this opportunity to condemn Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, for his persistent failure to defend UN officials or independent experts against these smear campaigns. And in fact, his role in fueling these smear campaigns by time and again pandering to Israel and its lying propagandists.
It's always, a good day to condemn Guterres is any day that ends in Y. So thank you for that. All right. Well, we are at the tail end of this program. Ali, we, of course, we're in a fundraising period, and I know that you wanted to say some things about that and helping to keep this independent beacon of truth and hoax busting alive in 2026 and beyond. So go ahead.
Thanks, Nora. Yeah, I think if you're on our mailing list, our email list, you'll know that earlier this week on Giving Tuesday, we ran a challenge in order to raise funds to support the Electronic Intifada's work in the coming year. And a very generous friend of the Electronic Intifada pledged to match every single donation we received this Giving Tuesday up to a total of $40,000. That means if you gave $100, our generous benefactor would match that with another $100. And we plan to keep this challenge running for a week. And we were going to talk to you about it on the live stream today. Well, the good news, I suppose, I mean, it's fantastic news, is that we already met the match. Thanks to the generosity of so many people around the world, including many regular viewers and listeners to this live stream. We actually exceeded $40,000 on Giving Tuesday. And so we will get all those matching funds. You helped us double that 40,000 to 80,000, and then you went above and beyond that. But if you didn't participate in the matching challenge, you do not have to feel left out at all. We're still in the midst of our annual year-end fundraising campaign. This is the time of year, November, December, when we raise the most of the funds that keep us running all year. And you can still make a donation to support the Electronic Intifada's independent journalism and help ensure we have all the resources we need in the coming year to keep reaching millions of people with this kind of fearless, detailed news and analysis about Palestine. All of the journalism you see at the Electronic Intifada website, all the writing we do, all of the reporting our colleagues in Gaza do, all of that is supported by the donations of people like you. And of course, you'll also help us keep supporting our colleagues in Palestine, especially in Gaza and their families. So if you would like to make a gift, you can go to our website, electronicintifada.net, and click Donate Now. Or if you're watching on YouTube, you can find a donation link in the description box below. I just want to say we're grateful to each and every person who supports our work, particularly those who make a monthly gift. And at our donation page, you can also choose to make a one-time donation or set up a monthly gift at any level that's comfortable for you. That gives us a lot more predictability, and it's just a great way to support our work in a really sustainable way. But no matter how much you give, to us, the amount is not important. We are always happy to see more and more people supporting us, broadening our base. Everyone's contribution counts, and it helps make us all stronger and more immune to the kind of censorship and bullying we see so many other media succumbing to. Now, please only make a gift if you have the financial means to do so. Please don't do it at the expense of essential needs for yourself or your family. We will always keep everything we publish free for everyone in the world to read, watch, and hear. So your gift also helps make this information available to those who are not in a position to make a donation. We'll never ask people to pay to read or watch the news and information we produce. So just to say again, to each and every person who makes our work possible and helps us educate millions of people all over the world with the truth about Palestine, from me and every one of my colleagues at the Electronic Intifada, thank you.
Well said, Ali. And yeah, thank you, Tamara, for the Ken Burns effect highlighting of the Donate Now link. You can, of course, go to electronicintifada.net or go to the link in our YouTube description below to make a donation. We already had a good look at the website. We can end it. Let's, of course, thank Tamara Nassar for our incredible producer and director extraordinaire. Thank you, Tamara. Ellie Gerzon for social media, Pierre Loisel for radio production, everyone at the Electronic Intifada, and on behalf of myself and Ali, John, Asa, and Tamara, thank you all, and we will see you next week.